Welcome to another broadcast of the American and Christian Truth News Network broadcast. Please subscribe, like, and share.
Welcome to the American and Christian Truth News Network. I am your host, Tony Franklin, and I want to thank you for tuning in to this broadcast on the Franklin News Angle, where we discuss news dealing with politics, entertainment, religion, and societal issues that affect us as everyday American citizens. Why are major cities continuing to defund our police departments across the United States? Is there a crime surge occurring in these major cities as our police departments are being shrunken down and funds are being diverted from police budgets nationwide? And because of this, is there a race by American citizens to gather arms, guns, and ammunition to protect themselves and their neighborhoods against the forming chaos that is occurring in most of these major cities? These are the things that we're going to discuss today on the American and Christian Truth News Network on the Franklin News Angle. According to a news article that was written by Jemima McEvoy back in August of 2020, a Forbes staff business writer, at least 13 U.S. cities have cut funding from police department budgets or decreased officer numbers, with several more in the process amid a national reckoning over what is considered systemic racism and police brutality, according to a Forbes tally. Though Black Lives Matter protests have brought the defund police debate to the forefront, key facts are that Austin, Texas is the largest city at that time to announce a police defunding effort, with the city council on Thursday voting unanimously to cut $150 million, roughly one third, from the police budget, reinvesting much of that sum in social programs, including food access and violent prevention and abortion access. Austin's announcement closely follows the sweeping budget change approved by Seattle, a $3.5 million budget cut, and the reinvestment of over $17 million that has resulted in the resignation of Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best, a 28-year veteran of the Police Department of Seattle's first Black police leader. The country's two largest cities, New York and Los Angeles, approved budget cuts weeks after protests began years ago. New York slashed $1 billion from its 2021 budget, totaling $88.9 billion, reallocating $354 million to mental health, homelessness, and education services, while Los Angeles approved a $150 million budget cut from its $1.86 billion proposed budget. Also, in California, San Francisco approved a $120 million cut to the police and sheriff's department, promising investments in Black residents, and Oakland passed its own $14.6 million budget reduction. A $15 million police budget cut also hit the nation's capital. At that time, Washington, D.C., in July of 2020, where the defund the police movement has become a hot button issue in the run-up of what was the 2020 election, with President Trump erroneously accusing competitor Joe Biden of supporting closed police departments. Baltimore eliminated roughly $22 million from its police budget. Portland, Oregon cut nearly $16 million. Philadelphia reduced police funding by $33 million. Hartford, Connecticut cut $1 million from its $40 million police budget. Norman, Oklahoma slashed $865,000, and Salt Lake City reduced its police budget by $5.3 million from the previously proposed one by the mayor. Several other cities are mulling the reallocation of funds within their departments, and several cities since 2020 have cut police budgets considerably. Now, this experience should be a lesson to state and local leaders about the real costs of irresponsible proposals to defund the police, writes U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr at that time. Minneapolis, the city where George Floyd died, has recently encountered friction regarding the city council's pledge to disband the police department. A state charter commission that Wednesday tabled the measure for further study for 90 days at that time, which prevented it from being put up for approval by voters in November of 2020. Though months of Black Lives Matter protests have brought the police funding debate to the forefront, the notion of slashing and reallocating police funds is far from universally popular. According to an Axios survey monkey poll, just 34% of Americans at that time in 2020 had a favorable view of the movement, while 53% did not. Some are pointing to recent spikes in gun violence in cities nationwide, including New York and Chicago, as reasons why police funding should not be decreased. Several cities have also moved to raise police spending, including Houston, San Diego, Durham, North Carolina, and Nashville, Tennessee. Trump at that time has used the polarizing defund the police movement's association with the left to combat Biden, saying Sleepy Joe Biden and the radical left Democrats want to defund the police. Trump has said that he wants great and well-paid law enforcement. His exact words were, "I want law and order." However, Biden has repeatedly insisted he has no intention to cut blue uniform budgets. So why is crime surging in America's largest cities, mostly controlled by Democrats throughout America? Well, as Joe Biden and his Democrat allies continue to promote soft on crime and anti-police policies that clearly serve to enable criminals, crime is surging in Democrat-controlled cities across America. This is not being told to us through the major news networks. Although crime is actually increasing nationwide, this trend is even more evident in America's 10 most popular cities that are led by Democrats, which are New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, Philadelphia, San Diego, Dallas, San Jose, and Austin. In New York City, New York total crime is up 22% compared to this time last year. This surge is driven by a 46.7% increase in robberies, a 35.6% increase in grand larceny, a 20.5% increase in felony assaults, and a 73% increase in actual shootings. These unsettling crime statistics come less than a year after New York City defunded the New York City Police Department by nearly $1 billion, a decrease of over 15% in the overall New York Police Department funding. This cut in funding resulted in a layoff of over 1,100 New York City police officers. New York is currently controlled by Democrat Mayor Bill de Blasio and a Democrat-dominated New York City Council in which Democrats hold 46 of 51 seats. In Los Angeles, California, violence is growing rapidly. The city of Los Angeles has seen a 4.1% increase in violent crime since 2020. This trend has been led by a staggering 24.8% increase in homicides and a 9.3% rise in aggravated assaults despite this upswing in violent crime. Citywide arrests are actually down since 2020. However, instead of arrests being done due to less crime, this trend is due to a lack of support for officers from the city of Los Angeles following cuts in the LAPD budget that exceeded $150 million, a decrease of nearly 10% in overall LAPD funding. Furthermore, Los Angeles' decrease in arrests but upswing in crime can be traced to radical Democrat Los Angeles City Council and District Attorney George Gascon, who recently announced both the abolition or abolishment of the cash bail system and a halt on the prosecution of a wide range of crimes. Crimes that are no longer being prosecuted by the Los Angeles County District Attorney include resisting arrest, trespassing, disturbing the peace, making criminal threats, and drug possession. The city of Los Angeles is run by Democratic Mayor Eric Garcetti and the Democratic-led Los Angeles City Council, where Democrats control 15 of those city council seats. In Chicago, Illinois, murder is on the rise as over 300 people have been murdered in the city so far in 2021. Chicago has seen at least 336 homicides for the first 6 months of the year, just 2 more than at this point in 2020, but 33% more than 2019's 252 homicides, according to an analysis by the Sun-Times. The city has recorded at least 1,892 shootings throughout June the 28th of this year. The most recent available statistics, an increase of almost 12% compared to 2020's 1,692 and a 53% increase in over 2019's 1,234 shootings during the same time. Now, this significant increase in shootings has occurred despite the fact that Chicago has some of the strictest gun control laws in America, actually. In Chicago, there is a 72-hour waiting period on all gun purchases, a background check requirement to purchase all firearms, an assault weapons ban, and a red flag law that allows police and family members to petition for the removal of firearms from those they deem dangerous. The surge in murders also comes after Chicago recently cut over $35 million from the Chicago Police Department budget. Chicago is governed by Mayor Lori Lightfoot and the Democratic-controlled Chicago City Council that Democrats maintain a 46 of 50 seats on that council. Chicago has been tormented by the leadership of Democrat mayors for nearly a century now, with every Chicago mayor since 1931 actually being a Democrat. In Houston, Texas, my home state, homicides are rising at a quicker rate than any other major city in America, with over 200 people murdered in the city so far in 2021. This represents an astonishing 91% upsurge in murders since 2019. If the trend continues, Houston will have one of the highest murder rates in America in 2021. Now, Houston is presently led by Democratic Mayor Sylvester Turner and the Democratic-run Houston City Council, wherein Democrats occupy 11 of 16 seats on that city council. Despite being located in the conservative state of Texas, the city of Houston has been plagued by Democratic mayors since 1982, with all of the last 6 Houston mayors being Democrats. In Phoenix, Arizona, residents fear for their well-being as violent crime has skyrocketed 15.7% since 2019. This increase has been propelled by a shocking 43.9% rise in homicides, a 24.2% swell in aggravated assaults, and a 2.6% growth in robberies. While Phoenix is located in the historically conservative state of Arizona, the city is now run by radical Democrat Mayor Kate Gallego and the Phoenix City Council, in which Democrats enjoy a 4-3 advantage over Republicans on the city council. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, homicides are soaring at a rate that far exceeds our national average. Over 275 people have been murdered in Philadelphia so far in 2021, a 37% increase since 2020. As in the case of other Democratic cities, Philadelphia's exponential rise in homicide comes after the city slashed $14 million from the Philadelphia Police Department's budget last year. Philadelphia is currently dominated by Democrat Mayor Jim Kenney and the Democrat-commanded Philadelphia City Council, where Democrats hold 14 of 17 seats on that city council. Democrats in Philadelphia has been tortured by Democrat mayors since 1952, with every one of the last 10 Philadelphia mayors being Democrats. Now, in San Diego, California, violent crime is up 1.7% since 2019, led by a 10% rise in murders and an 8% upswing in aggravated assaults. While these increases are actually lower than many other Democrat-controlled cities, San Diego is actually unique in that they are the only city on this list that I have gone through that has actually increased overall police funding by over 3.5% in 2020. In fact, San Diego has steadily increased police funding ever since the year 2011, as the city was previously controlled by Republican mayors Jerry Sanders and Kevin Faulconer. Now, however, the city is governed by Democrat Mayor Todd Gloria and the Democrat-dominated San Diego City Council, wherein Democrats occupy 8 out of 9 seats on the city council. It should come as no surprise that the major city that is recently experiencing conservative leadership and continuously funding the police is seeing lower increases in violent crimes. Now, in Dallas, Texas, homicides are becoming a growing concern for the residents there. Over 100 people have been murdered in Dallas so far in 2021, a 6.2% rise since 2020. Perhaps even more disturbing, human trafficking has increased an astonishing 25% in Dallas since 2020. Dallas's upswing in human trafficking can be attributed to a surge in illegal immigration at America's southern border, which recently hit its highest levels in 21 years as a result of the Biden's disastrous border policies. Today, Dallas is commanded by Democrat Mayor Eric Johnson. In San Jose, California, crime total has climbed 4.6% since 2020, with violent crime shooting up 16.8%. This increase has been piloted by a shocking 75% jump in homicides and a 27.7% rise in aggravated assaults. San Jose is presently controlled by Democrat Mayor Sam Lasardo and the Democrat-led San Jose City Council that Democrats maintain 10 of 11 seats. San Jose has been afflicted by an array of Democratic mayors since 1967, with all of the last 8 San Jose mayors consecutively being Democrats. Now, in Austin, Texas, safety is now sadly uncertain for many residents as murders have exploded 79% since 2020. Kidnappings have risen 4%, and aggravated assaults have increased 15%. Austin's rapidly growth in crime should shock nobody, since the city has cut $150 million from the Austin Police Department's budget back in 2020, a staggering 33% decrease in overall police funding. Austin is currently commanded by Democrat Steve Adler and the Democrat-ruled Austin City Council, where Democrats control 9 out of 10 seats. Now, as a result of these troubling statistics and Biden's administration's lack of action against crime in major American cities, a significant plurality of Americans now disapprove of the way our president and vice president is handling issues on crime in America. According to a recent ABC News and Washington Post poll released, 48% of Americans disapprove of how Biden is handling crime in America, whereas just 38% approve. Furthermore, the poll shows that clearly the majority of Americans, 55%, believe that increasing police funding will reduce the crime in all major cities of America. While this belief is held by most Americans, it starkly contrasts Biden's comments made in July of 2020, when he claimed some funding should absolutely be directed away from the police. Biden and the Democratic Party can attempt to ignore the facts all they want, but the facts are clear. Radical Democrat policies support criminals and foster the growth of crime in our major cities, and Biden and his Democrat allies continue dodging the issues as Americans are more worried and more concerned and suffer criminal issues taking place of all of our major Democratic controlled cities. As more Americans wake up and realize how volatile our economy has become due to policies being set by the Biden administration in Washington, D.C., as Americans continually see the effects that the pandemic is having on our nation, as more jobs are lost and as actually more Americans are leaving their jobs, as more protests continue in our major cities, and as cities continually cut police budgets, undermining the potential of our police forces in our major cities. Is there an arms race taking place in America as gun buying has spiked during the pandemic, during police budget cuts, during these riots, and is continuing to grow? Preliminary research data shows that about a fifth of all Americans who bought guns last year were first-time gun owners. Sales usually spike around elections, but the sheer volume now is notable. A gun store in Austin, Texas said more guns are being bought by more Americans than ever before. And in a news article published on May 29th in 2021, by Sabrina Tavernise, says that it's another week with another horrific mass shooting in cities across the country. Gun homicides were climbing. Democrats and Republicans argue over the causes. President Biden has said enough. But beneath the time-worn political cycle on guns in the United States, the country's appetite for firearms has only been increasing, with more being bought by more Americans than ever before in the history of our nation. While gun sales have been climbing for decades, they often spike in election years and after high-profile crimes. Americans have been on an unusual, prolonged buying spree fueled by the corona pandemic, major cities defunding police departments, and the protests last summer and the fears that they all have stoked. In March last year, federal background checks, a rough proxy for purchases, toppled 1 million in 1 week for the first time since the government began tracking gun sales in 1998. And the buying continued through the protest in the summer and the election in the fall until a week this spring broke the record with 1.2 million background checks. There was a surge in purchasing unlike anything we've ever seen, said Dr. Garen J. Whitemute, a gun researcher at the University of California. Usually it slows down, but this just keeps going, he stated. Not only were people who already had guns buying more guns, but people who had never owned a gun before were buying them too. New preliminary data from Northeastern University and the Harvard Injury Control Research Center shows that about a fifth of all Americans who bought guns last year were first-time gun owners. And the data, which has not been previously released, showed that new owners were less likely than usual to be male and white. Half were women, 1/5 were Black, and a fifth were Hispanic. In all, the data found that 39% of American households now owns guns. This is up from 32% in 2016, according to the General Social Survey, a public opinion poll conducted by a research center at the University of Chicago. Researchers said it was too early to tell whether the uptick represents a reversal from the past 20 years in which ownership was basically flat. Americans are in an arms race with themselves, said Marquise Harris Dawson, a representative who represents South Los Angeles, where the surge in gun violence has been particularly sharp. On the city council, there was just as much a run on guns as on toilet paper in the beginning of the pandemic. Now the gun debate is once again taking center stage, this time at a moment of hardened political division and deepening distrust by the American citizen in our government. Sales usually spike around elections, but the sheer volume this time is notable. It also gives a worrying glimpse into the way Americans view one another, as people want to protect themselves. As the country's major political parties move further apart, so does the legislation that flows from them. And like voting rights and abortion, guns are no exception. This month, Texas became the 20th state to pass legislation that says a permit is not required to carry a concealed handgun. According to Ann S. Teagan, an expert at the National Conference of State Legislatures. Illinois and the city of San Jose, California, where 9 people were killed in a mass shooting, are considering bills that would tax things like ammunition and certain types of guns. Now, there is no single reason for the surge, but social scientists point to many potential drivers. There is a breakdown in trust and a breakdown in a shared common reality, said Liliana Mason, a political scientist at the University of Maryland who writes about political violence. There is also this social change, and social change is scary. Many gun store workers reported last year set records for sales, and also that they noticed different types of buyers walking in the door. Thomas Harris, a former law enforcement officer who works at the gun counter at Sportsman Warehouse in Roanoke, Virginia, said that around March last year, the customers he would speak with began to include more white-collar workers, such as people from insurance firms and software companies. He said many of the buyers were not conservative, and most had never handled a gun. Outside of seeing something on TV or in a movie, they knew nothing about handling and using a firearm, he said, adding that they did not know how to even load a gun or what a caliber was. He said many of these apparent first-time buyers purchased more expensive guns in the range of $4,000 and up. The purpose, he said, was not to carry the gun around in public, but to keep it at home for protection. They were saying we're going to be locked down due to the pandemic and other constraints. We're constrained to our homes and we want to keep safe. Now, the Northeastern and Harvard data comes from a survey of 19,000 people conducted in April. Researchers found that about 6.5% of American adults bought guns in 2020, or about 17 million people. That was up 5.3% in 2019, said Dr. Matthew Miller, a professor of epidemiology at Northeastern who conducted the survey with Deborah Azrael, a researcher at Harvard University. While about a fifth of gun buyers last year were first-time buyers, the share was about the same in 2019, he said, suggesting that the trend did not start with the pandemic. As for gun owners overall in 2021, he said, 63% were male, 73% were white, 10% were Black, and 12% were Hispanic. The pandemic accelerated a trend of rising gun sales, according to The Trace, a news outlet that tracks gun sales. Purchases have been rising steadily over the past decade, with a jump around the beginning of 2013 after the Sandy Hook shooting took place. Now, sales did not change much under former President Donald J. Trump, but they exploded in 2020, up by 64% from the previous year. The single highest month last year was in June, as protests swept across the country after the murder of George Floyd. Now, the pace has continued this year. Americans bought more than 2.3 million guns in January, the highest since last July, according to The Trace. And overall, in the first quarter, sales jumped 18% compared to the first quarter of 2020, according to The Trace as well. Daniel Nass, data and graphics editor at the organization of The Trace, said that the raw numbers from the federal background checks database include things like checks for concealed carry permits, and that The Trace adjusts the number to strip that out. Now, the government does not track the number of guns sold in the United States. Even the federal background check data do not give a complete picture, as many sales are private. Estimates of the total number of guns in circulation as high as 400 million in the United States. Now, as I summarize this news broadcast, it's important to us to note that Americans are becoming more distrustful of policies that are being set forth in our nation, how the economy is doing, how Americans are suffering, and how continual protests continue to arise in our major cities. Are we at a pivotal point in America as we see America go through severe changes from economic policies to gas prices, to inflation, to job losses, to insecurities that are taking place in our nation as a whole? Are the American people now more distrustful of what is going on in our government? Are they worried for the safeties of their families? These things are something that are to consider when we look at everything that has been mentioned in this broadcast. And because of this, Americans are taking arms and seeking to protect themselves, their families, and their communities from violence that has taken place last year due to mass protests and over concerns and worries that are taking place in our nation. And this is something that we all should be concerned about, not as Democrats, Republicans, or independents, but as concerned, loving, and caring American citizens. And this is the Franklin News Angle on the American and Christian Truth News Network. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us on the Franklin News Angle. Join us every Tuesday and Friday on the American and Christian Truth News Network. Please subscribe, like, and share so you can get the latest in our Truth News broadcast. Goodbye, and God bless America.